And it's actually a very prominent African-American church in the community. They do a lot of things in the community. They have a small nursery school, and they have a very active membership. And it's a very traditional areas. This is Frederick McGee. He was born in 1861 in Mississippi. He was one of the nation's, not only Minnesota, but one of the nation's first African-American lawyers. And again, he spent a lot of his time working on civil rights cases, particularly around desegregation. When he moved as an adult to Minnesota, he became the first black lawyer admitted to the bar. He was also the first black lawyer admitted to the bar in, I believe it was Kansas and one other state. So he really was a trailblazer. He was also born to parents that were enslaved. So imagine what his journey must have been like, coming from that to being the first of many and becoming an attorney. He also worked, even though he decided to settle here, he worked on the national level, if you're familiar at all with W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. They were very pivotal in changing things for African Americans, and he worked with them and established the Niagara Agreement, which was the beginning of the NAACP, and other organizations that helped to advance the cause of black folks. So he did a lot of work and spent much of his time here in St. Paul. Lena O. Smith, and this is one of the people that came up in the classes today, just in the last class that I was with. They talked about her. First African-American woman to practice law in Minnesota. So she was born in 1885 in Kansas. Her family moved here in 1906. She attended law school a little bit later in her life and became a very active attorney and civil rights advocate. She helped find the Minneapolis branch of the Urban League, which again is another organization that fights not only for black people, but for the civil rights of all folks. She stayed here for the rest of her life and was extremely active in civil rights and practicing law until in her 80s. She fought many cases and won most of them. John Francis Wheaton, 1866. So he was the first University of Minnesota law school graduate. Again, another very significant first, and paved the way for many that have come after him. He was also the first one elected to the Minnesota legislature. There was not another African-American legislator until, let me just look at my notes here. I think it was like, I can't remember. I'll think of it. But it was many, many, many years before there was another legislator elected in Minnesota. So he did something that seems kind of probably silly now, but was very important at the time. Saloons, which we don't use that word really anymore. It's like a bar, restaurant bar. But he introduced the civil rights statute to make sure that all people could access them. So there was a time when even black folks could vote and they lived in the state, but there were certain places they still couldn't go. Again, thinking about the unevenness of how people existed in this space. So he made sure that everyone had access to saloons. He also fought many other cases. He defended murder defendants and, again, was extremely successful in his work. He did eventually move away from Minnesota to New York, where he continued his successful career. Clarence Wigington. He was born in 1883 in Kansas. He is one of the most iconic architects, again, not only in Minnesota, but across the country. And he was the first black person to serve as a municipal architect. So he worked for the city of St. Paul for about 3 decades, and most of that time he was the chief architect. He has built some of the most iconic buildings that we have in the St. Paul area. He's responsible for the construction of the design of most of the St. Paul public schools. The Highland Water Tower, if you've ever seen that, he did the designs for that, for mini golf courses, park buildings, almost any municipal building, the municipal airport, home and field in St. Paul, he was responsible for that. So a lot of his buildings are on the St. Paul Historic Register. Oh, if you're familiar with the St. Paul Carnival, he did, I think it was 5 ice castles for that as well. So he had great success and has really left his imprint all over Minnesota. I think it's something that people just don't know. But he was really important, did great work, and again, continued to live in Minnesota and St. Paul actually for most of his life. Frederick Jones, he created Thermo King portable refrigeration truck, which for us probably is not that important, except that we want fresh groceries when we go to the grocery store. And his invention made that possible. So truckers that are moving things across the country use his invention started or enabled that to happen in the beginning. He also invented some sound technology for movie and TV. What else? He had over, I think it was, 50 inventions that he patented. He was the first black person to be inducted into the American Society of Refrigeration Engineers. So if you're an engineer person, that's really significant. National Medal of Technology. So again, not only here in Minnesota did he make an imprint, but nationally he had a lot of influence on the technology around not only the refrigeration, but a lot of other things. So made a lot of important inventions that we still use to this day. And then Nellie Stone Johnson, who happens to have a school named after her in Minneapolis, she actually grew up in Minnesota. 1905, her family had a farm in the Dakota County area. And she was really involved, and so was her father actually, which is how she got started, in unionizing things. Unions are important, they're very important here in Minnesota. And she really was at the heart of much of that work. She attended the University of Minnesota, and they had a very active political group of students, and she was a part of that. She worked for a long time as an elevator operator. Many years ago, elevators were not automatic. There were people who actually operated them, and it was a pretty important job. She was one of those people. And while she was doing that, she helped to organize all of those people, her fellow employees, into the Hotel and Restaurant Workers Union, which, again, still is in existence. She was a founder of the DFL party. And as it says up there, the first black person in Minneapolis to be elected to a citywide office as a member of the library board. So, again, many firsts. So really what I'd like you to encourage you to do is learn more. And not just the students, but I'm really looking at all the adults in the room too. If you don't know some of these things, if you can't talk about them with your students, it's really your responsibility to learn them as well. There's more and more information about these people and about the history and many other people, like I mentioned, that you can seek out. TPT did a series. They have there's a show that's about, I don't know, almost 2 hours long that highlights many of these people. But it's really important to understand how Black lives came to be in existence in Minnesota and to see how that's playing out now and what sort of things are happening now and the contributions made. So while we saw lots of firsts and we were really progressive as a state, in many ways things have stalled, and so we have to understand what was happening then and why the state was progressive. In some ways still feels like it's progressive, but there's a lot of inequality for not only Black people but other people of color. And I think it's really important to look back at this, to let students see people that reflect them, but also people that don't reflect them so that they understand that there are contributions by a lot of other people, and to really respect and value those contributions and those people. So again, I would encourage you to learn more, and I appreciate you having, just taking a time to focus on this topic and then inviting me in to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Wells.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, any announcements for today? I think there's one. Caleb Little.
Just a reminder, if you want to come out tonight at 6 p.m., we have a speech showcase. If you want to support your friends and their speeches, that's tonight at 6. There will be cookies.